Hello everyone, and welcome back to Real History. I am your host, history professor Jared Frederick, and today, on what would have been the 95th birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I am standing before one of the most iconic landmarks of the American Civil Rights Movement. Not quite a century after the conclusion of the American Civil War, many African Americans within the southern United States had yet to fully realize the dreams of emancipation and full equality before the law. This was perhaps no better evident than right here in Dallas County, Alabama, where very few people of color had gained the right to vote in the decades since the American Civil War. In states like Alabama, roadblock after roadblock had been established to curtail African American enfranchisement and citizenship. In this county in particular, fewer than 3 out of 100 people were registered to vote. This is something that catches the eye of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as the movement enters the year 1965. This becomes a focal point of that moral crusade to change the political dynamic of the country. Following the death of civil rights marcher Jimmy Lee Jackson at the hand of Alabama state troopers, that was truly an event that triggered a march, one of several marches that would springboard from the bridge that we see behind me. Perhaps the most famous or infamous of these occurred on March 7th, 1965. Led by John Lewis of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and Hosea Williams, these men led 600 individuals across this bridge, and on the opposite side they were greeted by Alabama state troopers who were dispatched by the fervently segregationist governor George Wallace. This culminated in one of the most infamous acts of violence against civil rights activists in what became known as Bloody Sunday, an event that galvanized the nation because it was televised to tens of millions of people who in essence saw it happen in real time. The violence inflicted here spurred the passage of the 1965 Civil Rights Act just 3 months later. We've moved a little bit upriver to gain a view of the famous Edmund Pettus Bridge. This bridge was constructed in 1940, but as we said at our previous stop, its most famous incident occurs in March of 1965 as a focal point of the civil rights movement, and more specifically, the march from Selma to Montgomery. For the purposes of our channel, it is also noteworthy to point out that this is also associated with the cinematic depiction of these events in Ava DuVernay's 2014 film, Selma. This is one of my favorite historical films, and artistically, I think it's one of the best films of the 21st century. What we get is a rich narrative mosaic of all of the conversations as the march from Selma to Montgomery is underway. We not only get the perspective of King, his wife, his subordinates, but also George Wallace. We get some executive perspective in the form of the late, great Tom Wilkinson as Lyndon B. Johnson. If you haven't seen this movie, it is most definitely worthwhile to check out, and rest assured it's going to be one that we will explore in the future here on Real History. We're now standing at the Brown Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church, and it was here at noon on March 7th, 1965, that individuals rose up from the pews and they embarked on the march toward the bridge several blocks in that direction. This was an establishment that was at the heart of the local community. In 1952, the homes off to my left, the George Washington Carver Housing Project, were constructed as a big step in the regional civil rights movement. And it was from those homes that many people involved within the movement would find accommodations, meals, and camaraderie for pushing the crusade forward. Drugstores were front and center in the civil rights movement. They, in many cases, had been hallmarks of segregation. White and black customers couldn't sit at the same lunch counters. And this was also true of the Carter drugstore right here in Selma. And I believe that there are some scenes in the movie that show this establishment as well. But it was only by pressing the button that these grassroots hometown activists could bring about societal change, even at your local soda counter. We're here in front of the Dallas County Courthouse, and as you may be aware, courthouses were front and center in the quest to gain the right to vote, because within these buildings was located the county registrar's office, and that would often determine who could vote and how. Throughout various southern states, there were poll taxes, there were literacy tests, there were incomprehensibly difficult examinations that were administered to African American voters, would-be African American voters. And we shouldn't be at all surprised that Dr. King and his comrades set their sights on this building as a focal point to gain those inherent legal rights. Thank you for joining us on this Real History tour of historic Selma, Alabama, as we have explored both history and Hollywood, where both the actual events and the cinematic events took place. Until we see you next time on Real History, as the late, great John Lewis would say, go out and make some good trouble.